Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Layla. In today's video, we are going to talk about learning Korean. So without any formal training and by learning on my own, I was able to be placed at level 2 at Sogang University. And after completing level 2 those past 3 months, I moved on to level 3, and these are the grades that I received. So I figured I will take this time today to talk to you about my experience learning Korean on my own, my experience at Sogang for the past 3 months. I will try to give you some tips that are going to help you 10x your Korean learning process. And last but not least, I will share some of the realities of learning Korean in Korea that people don't talk about. Okay, so let's get started. So let's talk about my personal timeline real quick. 2006, I fall in love with Korean. I buy a book on Amazon. The only thing I was able to accomplish at the time was learn the alphabet. I knew how to read and how to write, but that was about it. I tried to learn a language, but I was not motivated that much, and I really had no purpose for doing it. So for 13 years, all I did was watch Korean dramas, listen to Korean music, and by doing that, I was able to learn basic expressions. Fast forward 2019, when I decided to move to Seoul, and I realized, you know what, I need to take this learning very seriously. Now I had purpose, and because of purpose, I was motivated, I was disciplined, and I was willing to put in the work. I wish I could tell you that they were easy tricks, but they're not. It's hard work. No matter how many how to learn Korean videos that you watch on YouTube, the only way you will learn the language is by doing the work, by studying, by being disciplined, by having, a purpose attached to it. And my number one advice would be to keep it simple, stupid. Don't overcomplicate things. Don't buy 10,000 books. Don't buy highlighters, notebooks, or cute stuff to motivate you. That's not gonna work. No fluffy stuff. Just get to the bottom of it. And here's how I did it. Let's talk about the 3 apps that I highly recommend when you are learning Korean. The first one is called Papago, and Papago is the shit, trust me. The first thing you can do is translate text. That comes in handy when you're having a conversation with someone via text. You can translate from Korean to English or English to Korean, or using whatever languages that you feel comfortable with. So you put in the word and then it translated for you, and you can also hear it.
날씨가 추워요. It's cold.
The second thing you can do is use the voice option. So you can say something and have it translated from English to Korean or Korean to English. 한국에 왔을 때 한국어를 잘못했는데 지금은 잘하게 됐어요.
When I came to Korea, I was not good at Korean, but now I am good at it.
Okay, so the translation is a bit off because what it means is that I've gotten better at Korean. Doesn't mean that I'm necessarily good at it now, but anyway. All right, so let's say you have the person in front of you and you want to have a conversation. You can also change the language to whatever fits for you, and then you can have your conversation. 안녕하세요. 오늘은 한국어를 공부하는 것을 이야기하고 싶어요.
Hello, I would like to talk about studying Korean today.
And then the person can respond, Sure, go ahead, I'm listening.
물론이지, 듣고 있어.
Now keep in mind this is 반말, so it's casual Korean, which is usually not okay to use, but since you're a foreigner, you're using the app, the person would most likely be understanding. Last but not least is the image section. So if you see a text in Korean that you don't understand, you take a picture of it and then it'll translate it for you. How freaking cool is that? Okay, now move on to the second app. So that is Naver, that everyone knows. And here you can use it as a dictionary. You can do much more, but let's just focus on the dictionary part today. So then you get the meaning. You can also hear it.
모으다.
You have different examples. And yeah. Last but not least, we have Dongsa. Dongsa means verb, and this is a way for you to conjugate verbs or adjectives in Korean. That way you won't get too confused and you can make sure you're saying the right thing. All right, that is all for the apps. Let's move on to books. Again, keep it pretty simple, pretty basic. I only have one book to recommend. That's the book that I used. And this is the one I purchased in 2006, but they have an updated version now, which is this one here. I finished the elementary version prior to moving to Korea. It took me about a year, a few hours of studying every week. I am a sucker for grammar. I believe that proper grammar is the foundation on which you can build your vocabulary. Proper grammar will allow you to correctly formulate your sentences, because the last thing that you want is rush your learning process to get to a basic conversation level riddled with mistakes. When you learn on your own, which is what I did, you need a book that will explain things to you in a way that you can understand. I did not have a teacher. I did not have any Korean friends to teach me. Therefore, I needed the book to be my teacher, and this book was perfect. This is the continuing version of the book series. That's the one I currently have. And as you can see, it's very detailed with the explanations and with the examples. And that way you are more likely to remember things and apply them correctly. Now, granted, it's not fancy. You don't see like pictures or anything fun, but that's the point. You have to stay focused and just study. At the end of each chapter, you have exercises and then answers available to correct yourself. All right, so now that you have your basic apps and you have the one book that you're going to use to study Korean, let's talk about things that you can do on the side that are going to enrich your learning experience. Number one would be obviously watching Korean dramas, and we all love Korean dramas, don't we? So that's going to help you know more about Korean culture. It's going to teach you basic expressions. It's going to also help you train your ears when you recognize things that you've learned in the past. And it's going to help you with intonation, like how people say certain things. The second thing you can do is listen to Korean music. I remember when I learned English back in the days, Britney Spears was my go-to person. She would be the one I would, the songs that I would sing all the time, and that helped with my pronunciation. I did the same thing with Korean, and I highly recommend you do that. That's going to be of tremendous help. Number three is something I wished I had done when I was in Boston, which was practicing speaking. As I mentioned, I did not have any Korean friends. Therefore, when I arrived in Korea, my speaking was trash. And by trash, I mean lack of practice made me very, very insecure, like no confidence whatsoever. And before speaking, I would just think so much, so afraid to make any mistakes. So in order to avoid that paralysis when you arrive here, I would highly advise that you find apps online that could connect you with a Korean person and then practice Korean that way. I cannot recommend anything because I haven't really tried it, but that would be my number one advice. Well, when it comes to speaking and practicing the speaking, that would be my number one advice. Find someone to talk with, even if it's only for an hour a week. That's going to help you build up some confidence. Okay, so let's move on to my review of Sogang University, the Korean classes. I'm going to make it quick and brief. So I started in September during COVID, so all the classes were online and we used Zoom. The classes were Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. and we had 2 different teachers and 4 different classes. Between the class, we had a 10-minute break and sometimes a 20-minute break as well. When it comes to participation, you might wonder, how does that work, right? So we usually all talk at the same time. Sometimes when the teacher is asking us to repeat something, but when it comes to assignments, she would assign us to different rooms where you would be able to have a conversation with another classmate, just the 2 of you together or the 3 of you together. So I think that was okay. I personally think that my speaking abilities would have improved had I been in the classroom with my classmates face to face. But you know what? This is what we had to deal with, so we made the best that we could. In terms of the books, so you have this one. This is the main book. There are no grammar explanations, so Sogang books are books that you need a teacher for. You cannot buy this and study on your own. There's no point because you won't understand what you're studying. Number 2 is the workbook, very handy, so you can practice all the grammar concept and then you have the answers. This is Seogi, so this is the writing books. This is where you can practice your writing, you can practice your spelling, and this is also where you learn how to write paragraph on certain topics, etc. So I think that's very helpful. And this is the grammar book and then the vocabulary book. But again, this is not enough. You still need a teacher. So I would obviously not recommend that you buy Sogang books if you study Korean on your own. In terms of my classroom, so I really like my classmates. Most of them were millennials, just like me. We were all purpose-driven. We were very motivated. Everybody was always on time. Everybody was participating. The atmosphere was very conducive to a good learning process. And I have to say that I had the best Korean teacher. She happened to be my first and she just blew my mind. That woman was motivating. She was encouraging. She was very organized. She explained things very well. She was just friendly and dynamic. I mean, you just couldn't get bored. You just couldn't not do well. I mean, she was just amazing. My hope is that for the next trimester, I get awesome classmates and an amazing teacher, because I believe those two things have a great impact on, you know, my learning process and how things are for me. So let's see how that goes. Now, let's talk about things people don't tell you about learning Korean here in Korea. And the number one thing is it is quite difficult to improve your Korean on a daily basis. And let me tell you why. Picture two different scenarios. Scenario number one, let's talk about your daily activity. You take a cab, you go buy something at a store, at a convenience store, or do your grocery or whatever. Most likely, you would end up having the same conversation over and over with the clerk. Sometimes you won't even have any other conversation with the person because they see you as a foreigner, they don't want to engage with you, so therefore there might not even be any conversation at all. But if there is a conversation, it's always the same. So there's really no point in improving at that level. Let's say now, second scenario, you meet someone for the very first time and that person is actually interested in having a conversation with you. Guess what? That person will always ask you the same questions everybody asks you. 어느 나라에서 오셨어요? 성함이 어떻게 되세요? 한국에 왜 왔어요? 한국에 언제 왔어요? So over and over, you would end up knowing those questions and knowing the answers to those questions, but the conversation will never go beyond that. So that's why I say it is actually quite difficult to improve your Korean, and the keyword is improve your Korean on a daily basis. Again, keyword. Okay, so that's number one. Number two would be you most likely would have to pay someone to have a conversation with you. Now, if you have a Korean boyfriend or a girlfriend, then that's fine. If you have Korean best friends here that have all the time in the world to spend time with you, that's fine. If that is not the case, then most likely you would have to end up paying someone. And by that, I mean going to meetups. So there are meetups where you can actually have one-on-one conversation for an hour for 10,000 Korean won. And I find out to be very helpful because you have that person undivided attention. That person is not going to be frustrated by you. That person is going to give you all the time in the world to think and say what you want and make mistakes, and that person will be able to provide guidance. So you can come up with a theme that you want to talk about. You can come up with lessons that you want to go over. Whatever it is, that time is yours. And I find that to be very empowering because it's going to help you improve your speaking. And I'm sorry to say, but basically I have to spend that money to improve my speaking because otherwise it's going to take me forever. Number three, which is something that's very interesting, but it's something I never really considered before, but the more you speak Korean, the more you will start to think like a Korean person. Let me explain. So we all know about Korean society, for example, how respecting your elders is very important and how hierarchy is very important. And that's also reflected in the language, in the way that you speak, you know, 판말, and then the yo form, and then the seyo form, and then the 입니까, 입니다, whatever. So there are different levels to it. what I've also noticed while learning Korean from my teacher is that Korean people sometimes, if it's something negative, they don't want to say it straight to your face. And that's something I knew about Korean in general. Like, for example, if you make plans with someone, they're not going to tell you, I don't want to do it. They'll give you an excuse, or they would agree, and then later on, via text or whatever, cancel on you because they want to save face, they want you to save face, blah, blah, blah. But what I did not realize is that that's also reflected in the way that they speak. So my teacher said, for example, if someone asks you, do you want to do that? My inclination would be to say, no, I don't want to, or I don't want to do it. 싫어해요, for example. But the teacher said you kind of have to go around it. You can't just be so brutal. So instead of saying you don't like it, say that you are not very much interested in it. Or always try to soften the blow. Always try to like go like this. And I'm thinking, oh my God, wouldn't it be just simple if I just state how I feel? But she said, no, I mean, you could, but that's not going to be conducive to you speaking Korean, because speaking the language, you also have to keep the essence of it as well. So that's something I've kind of struggled with. I remember we did role playing, like an interview type of thing. And in the book, basically, the person was asking, okay, which department do you want to work for? And the answer that we were supposed to give was, it doesn't matter. Any department would work. The other question was, what job do you want to do? It doesn't matter. Whichever you want to give me, I will do my best. Or when do you want to start working? Oh, it doesn't matter, whenever it's convenient for you. And I'm thinking, oh my God, no, I know the answers. I know when, I know where, I know what I want to do. Why can't I just state it? But yeah, so that's something I had to realize, is that as I'm learning Korean, I have to also learn the subtlety of the language and how I need to navigate society by thinking like a Korean person, therefore speaking like one. So that's going to be very interesting for someone like me who is very straightforward, straight to the point. Having to juggle my way through my statements is going to be a very interesting concept.